Hello, ladies and gents, Happy New Year. That might sound like a kind of odd way to start a video, or at least a video that's coming out today, but the 25th of March is also the feast of the Annunciation. The Annunciation is the moment at which the angel Gabriel is supposed to have appeared to Mary and informed her that she was going to have a child, and of course that child was going to be Jesus. So, in the medieval period, because the Annunciation is kind of the start of the Christian story, or at least the start of Christ's time on earth, starting the countdown to the Nativity, the 25th of March, the Feast of the Annunciation, was quite commonly perceived by a great many people, common and noble alike, as being the start of the year. So very often, years in the medieval period will be reckoned starting not from the start of January, but actually from the end of March. So, ladies and gents, Happy New Year. I would like to focus on one particular incident that happened on this day, that actually happened on this day in 1306, and that is the inauguration of King Robert I of Scotland, Robert the Bruce, as he is, I suppose, more widely known. Now, as you can imagine, the new year, the 25th of March, could be seen as a rather auspicious moment for an inauguration. It provides an opportunity, as New Year does now, to sort of set aside past things and past mistakes, and start up with something new and innovative, and progressive and exciting. And quite frankly, in March 1306, Robert Bruce is in a position where he needs to emphasize that he's putting past mistakes behind him, and that the kingdom is putting past mistakes behind it, and that Scotland is, and he and his supporters are moving on into better, brighter, a more positive future. Because, as we looked at last month, Bruce starts his bid for power, his bid to become king, in early February 1306 by essentially assassinating his rival, John Comyn, Lord of Badenoch. And not just by an act of violence, but by an act of sacrilege, because he kills Comyn in front of an altar at Greyfriars Kirk in Dumfries. So, as I said last month, not a very auspicious start for King Robert. Nevertheless, in the month and a half or so since committing that assassination, whatever you want to call it, Bruce has been busy. He hasn't just rested on his laurels. He hasn't just been making preparations for this inauguration. He has been hard at work, and his supporters have been hard at work as well. Bruce moves from Dumfries up to Glasgow. He secures the support of the Scottish clergy for his actions. He is very famously absolved of any wrongdoing by the Bishop of Glasgow, Robert Wishart, who is a long-standing Bruce supporter and particularly a long-standing opponent of English power and English authority in Scotland. Having done that, Bruce then sets to work capturing as many castles as he can, drawing people into his affinity, generally speaking trying to bring as much of Scotland's territory, but particularly of its kind of leading men under his authority, under his banner, ready to resist any challenges, any English challenges, particularly to his rule. But it is still important that at his earliest possible convenience, Bruce can formalise his kingship. can have himself inaugurated as King of Scots to make the whole process official. The most important thing for him to do is, of course, to gain some degree of physical security for his rule, but at the end of the day, if he's never actually had the crown made on his head, if he hasn't been formally made King of Scots, then there is a huge question mark hanging over his supposed kingship, and it is supposed kingship until that inauguration takes place. So towards the end of March, preparations are made, and Bruce heads up to Scone, which is, at this period in history at least, the traditional place where Kings of Scots are made, are inaugurated, and he undertakes this ceremony to formalise his position as King of Scots. Now, you'll have noticed I've been using this term inauguration and inaugurated rather than crowned and coronation. Now, this is a really important point, because at this period in Scottish history, Scottish kings are not anointed as part of the ceremony by which they are created. English kings are, French kings are, various continental kings receive this act of unction, the blessing of the new monarch with Holy Oil. This is a right that can only be granted by the Pope, and in 1306 has not been granted to the Scots. So Scottish kings do not receive coronations before this period. They are inaugurated. Now this does have some symbolic significance. This is something that the English have historically kind of held over the head of Scottish kings. It's been used by previous English royal administrations to emphasise the superiority of English kingship over Scottish kingship, and various Scottish kings have worked very hard to gain some recognition from the Pope that they should be allowed to participate in this act of unction, that they should in fact receive coronations rather than mere inaugurations as well. Bruce himself spends a great deal of time trying to convince the Pope to let him do this, and actually he eventually does get permission. That permission arrives very shortly before Bruce's death, so Robert himself never actually receives unction as far as we can tell, but his son David II in 1331, which is actually a couple of years after David has become king, we'll probably deal with that in a subsequent video, but David II, Bruce's son, becomes the first King of Scots ever to receive unction, and therefore to have a coronation rather than an inauguration. But for Bruce, we are talking here about an inauguration. Now, there are some issues surrounding Bruce's inauguration. There are actually a whole ream of issues surrounding Bruce's inauguration, but in terms of the practicalities, there are some serious problems facing him, because all of the honours of Scotland, the crown jewels and so forth, have all been taken by the English. So too has the stone of destiny, the stone of Scone, on which the kings are supposed to be inaugurated. The ceremonial robes and so forth have all gone. All of the accoutrements that go along with the creation of a King of Scots have all been lifted. They've all been pinched and taken away down to England. Presumably some of them melted down and turned into other things. This is of course an issue for Bruce. How do you make someone a king without having all of the equipment that is normally associated with this ceremony? Well, as luck would have it, when Bruce goes to Wishart, in the aftermath of the killing of Comyn, Wishart reveals that he had stowed away some vestments and some other bits and pieces of equipment and paraphernalia associated with the making of a King of Scots, which Wishart of course is then quite happy to hand over to Bruce to allow him to use these as part of the ceremony. Now, the more suspicious among you may very well be sitting there wondering what precisely the difference is between gear that has been spirited away, hidden from the English just in case somebody else ever emerges who can become King of Scots, and gear that has been very hastily cobbled together to kind of look more or less like the right sort of stuff, and then used by Bruce in this ceremony. And you would be quite within your rights to think that. It may very well be that Bruce and his supporters just have some new stuff made, some new honours of Scotland and so forth put together, some new vestments made, presumably in a hurry, because it's all got to be done within that month and a half or so between the 10th of February when he sticks the knife into Common and the 25th of March when he's being inaugurated. It may very well be that there is a bit of a fix here, but what else are the Scots to do? They don't have any of the old stuff, and they're not getting it back anytime soon, so they just create new stuff. Nonetheless, even if this is what they are doing, there is still an effort to try and give a sense of continuity. Work is put into, presumably at the time, but certainly afterwards, as accounts start to emerge Scottish accounts start to emerge of this event. Efforts are made to emphasise the notion that there is a continuity between the making of kings before Robert Bruce and the making of Robert Bruce as King of Scots in March 1306. Now, another issue facing the Bruce party here is that traditionally the act of placing the crown on the King of Scots' head at his inauguration has gone to the Earl of Fife. Now, the Earl of Fife in 1306 is both a minor and also in English custody. So he cannot really be counted upon to do that job. He's not available. If Bruce can't get the Earl of Fife to come and do it, well, we'll never know, I suppose, whether he felt he could get away with that or not. But if the Earl of Fife isn't there, it's yet another thing that is counting against Bruce's kingship, that is emphasising the fact that this is all really kind of hastily put together and that Bruce is just desperately trying to get that crown on his head, trying to get some semblance of officialness around what amounts to a kind of armed rebellion against the English authorities that have established themselves in Scotland over the last couple of years. As luck would have it, Duncan, the Earl of Fife, has an aunt, Isabella. Now, Isabella, on paper, you would think would be less than eager to help out, to come and lend an air of authenticity to Bruce's inauguration by taking the part of her nephew and placing the crown on Bruce's head. Because Isabella is the Countess of Buchan. She is married to another John Comyn, Earl of Buchan, who is a cousin of the John Comyn Bruce just murdered, or just killed. And be careful about using that term murder when we talk about what happened to Comyn, because it kind of presumes certain things about Bruce's motivations and so forth. Anyway, Isabella is a relative, in effect, of the late John Comyn, Lord of Badenoch. So you would think those ties of kinship would deter her somewhat from wanting to lend a hand to the Bruce cause. However, that is not the case. She rushes to Bruce's side and participates on the 25th in that inauguration. She places the crown on Bruce's head as part of the inauguration ceremony. We have later quite dramatic accounts of her perhaps stealing a horse. She is apparently down in England when news reaches her that Bruce is making his bid for power and making preparations for his inauguration. And there's this suggestion that she might pinch one of her husband's horses to actually ride north and participate in the inauguration of King Robert. Either way though, whether that's true or not, she is there on the 25th and she places the crown on Bruce's head, giving this added layer of legitimacy, this added layer of authenticity to the inauguration. Now it has to be said that the precise details of how the inauguration actually works, what's involved, are a little bit sketchy. It's tricky to piece together exactly how the ceremony works. It seems that the ceremony probably starts at Scone Abbey, that there is an address by one of the leading clerics that are present, and that the king is made king, that the crown is placed on his head in the abbey, and then the party, the royal party presumably leading, but the whole congregation then heads to Moot Hill nearby, where the king is enthroned, and the various magnates and leading men of the kingdom who are present will come up and pledge their allegiance to the king. But there's plenty of scope for debate on precisely how all of this plays out in reality. So unfortunately we can't go into too much detail really on the blow-by-blow events of what goes on. The event seems to go reasonably well though. All who are present at least seem to feel like all the boxes have been ticked, at least all the ones that can be ticked. And a couple of days later, it seems, there is the Sunday of the week in which the inauguration happens, there is a grand Palm Sunday Mass. Of course, Palm Sunday, the start of Easter week, perhaps the most important week in the Christian calendar in the medieval period. There's a grand Palm Sunday Mass held, celebrated by William Lamberton, Bishop of St Andrews, again someone who Bruce seems to have been in talks with since at least 1304, since at least 2 years before the actual inauguration. It's not clear whether Lamberton is late. There are some suggestions that part of the reason why this grand ceremony is held on Palm Sunday at Scone is because Lamberton didn't get there in time for the inauguration, and so the Palm Sunday Mass acts as a kind of second inauguration, giving the Bishop of St Andrews, the most important bishop in the kingdom, his chance to have his say and legitimise Bruce's kingship by his presence and by his involvement. And then the Scots get right back into the business of trying to bring as much of Scotland under Bruce's control as they can, because now the clock is kind of ticking against them quite badly. Edward I, the King of England, has not taken especially well to what Bruce has done, hardly surprising, and he has dispatched an army. Edward I is kind of old and sick at this point, so he doesn't come north himself, at least immediately. He sends Aymer de Valence, who is not quite yet the Earl of Pembroke, but eventually will be. He sends Valence north with an army, and if the later Scottish chronicler John Barber is to be believed, this army is sent north with the dragon banner, symbolising the fact that no quarter is to be given, no prisoners are to be taken in finding Bruce and capturing him and bringing him to justice. Bruce meets this army near Perth at Methven. there's a battle fought. We can debate a little bit about precisely what happens at that battle, and I'm sure we will in a couple of months' time when we get to the anniversary of that. I think it's May is the anniversary of that, but I could be wrong about that. It's not too far in the future though. So I promise we will do a video on that, and we'll have a little closer look at the details of the Battle of Methven. The important thing for us here though is that Bruce loses that battle, and he is forced to flee. He flees with his army west, and as they move west, they are ambushed at Tindrum in Argyll, and they are once again defeated. And at that point, his army melts away. Bruce is reduced, in effect, to the status, essentially, of an outlaw within his own kingdom, an outlaw king, if you will. And it would seem at this point that an observation that we are told Robert's queen, Elizabeth de Burgh, made at the festivities surrounding the inauguration, that her observation is going to come true, that Bruce and Elizabeth are king and queen of the May only, that their reign is going to be short, that Bruce's effort to become king has been nothing more than kind of childish folly. You could be forgiven at the end of 1306 for believing that, but as hopefully many of you know, and as we'll explore in subsequent videos, the truth is somewhat more complex and perhaps less grim than that. I think, folks, that's probably all I want to say here today. Thank you very much for listening. I appreciate that the output on the channel continues to be somewhat spotty. Some weeks we have lots and lots of stuff coming out, and some weeks we have very little. I will do my best to try and rectify that as time goes on. But thank you very much for your patience. Thank you for your forbearance. Thank you for your support. And I will see you soon for more videos like this. Thank you.